Hi everyone, this is Stemage, and I wrote the soundtrack for the new video game Bubsy, Paws on Fire. It was a lot of fun to work on, but it was also challenging for a few reasons. I thought I'd make a video to share what is so peculiar about this soundtrack. If you're a musician, you might find this interesting. If you're not, what could possibly go? So Bubsy Paws on Fire has 3 main characters, with 1 additional character used in bonus levels. Also, Paws on Fire is a runner, but it's not an endless runner. Each level has a defined length split up with checkpoints, and the length of that level may change depending on the character you choose. So, making plans with the choice provisions guys. We're trying to figure out a way to keep some musical consistency between characters. We also wanted to keep the music from sounding samey across multiple levels of the same world. Staying away from looping isn't quite enough, because you might end up playing the same level a few times with different characters. It can start to sound repetitive. So here's what we came up with: layers and segments. Every song in the game has a musical bass layer, which consists of bass guitar and drums and maybe some other part. On top of that is a character layer. Now, this layer contains other instrumentation that fits the character, putting in the melodies and the chords and the bacon bits. So originally the idea was to use the same melodies and chords for each character and simply replace the instruments, but I got bored. What ended up happening was writing a completely different top layer for each character. Here's some examples. So this is the session for the song Howlraiser. We've got the bass layer up top, then the character layers, Bubsy, Virgil, and Wooly. And so I'm just gonna play what the bass layer sounds like here. So, and here's Bubsy. And then together. So the plan originally was to just change the instruments and leave the music the same, but instead I wrote some new stuff for the other 2 characters. So here's Virgil. And then here is Wooly. Here's another one. This is Murphy's Paw. This is what the bass layer sounds like. Something straightforward, so we'll start with Bubsy. Here's what Bubsy's layer sounds like on top. Here's Virgil. And then Wooly. By this point, I was starting to write simpler bass sections to be able to have more options for writing character layers on top. Here is the last example. This is the song Knit and Run. Here is the bass layer for Knit and Run. Bubsy. Virgil. And Wooly. So different instruments, different parts. One thing I realized later is that you can always change the character of the bass guitar or the bass instrument by adding an extra bass layer. So if you listen to just the bass guitar in the bass layer. So what I did was I duplicated that bass part in Bubsy's layer, rolled off a lot of the low end, and just left some fuzz. So it sounds like this. Blah, blah. Here's Virgil. Do. Here's Wooly. Glub, glub. So that was a way that I learned to add some additional character to character layers. My friend Adan Taylor actually outlined this exercise to me quite well. He said with our Metroid Metal stuff, we normally take the main melody from a Metroid song and stick a completely different backing track to go along with it. But in the case of Bubsy, I'm writing these new melodies and layers on top of the same bass track 3 times over. Well, Dan, I hadn't really thought of it like that. Thanks, dude. So that covers layers. What about segments? Again, Pause on Fire levels have a defined length in seconds. You can't speed them up or slow them down. However, Bubsy levels aren't the same length as Virgil levels, because Virgil is a super fast dude. And as I mentioned, we want to keep the songs from sounding samey. What can we do to keep things a bit more musically unpredictable? Here's what we did. Each song is split up into segments consisting of an intro, 3 middle segments, which we called variations, and an outro. In a level where you play as Bubsy, for example, the intro always plays. Then 2 of the 3 middle segments will play in a random order. Then the outro plays at the end to bring it home. What does this do? Well, it ensures that in the middle of a level, the music will take some turns you weren't expecting. It's a cool idea in theory, but that means I have to write musical segments that sound okay played in any order. Variation A has to sound good transitioning into Variation B and C and the outro, and it has to sound good coming from any of those variations or the intro. That became challenging. So here we have Murphy's Paw. This is all of the character layers. In addition, we have all of the different segments here as well. The intro, Variation A, Variation B, Variation C, and the outro. This is just to show examples of how the game could choose to play these segments in any order. For example, you could go from the intro into Variation A and it would sound like this. Or if I move Variation C over here to the left, you could go from the intro into Variation C instead. You could, for example, go from Variation C into Variation A. That might be what the game decides to do. Or you could go from Variation C into the outro. It sounds something like this. So, you could go a number of ways, and it was definitely a challenge to get everything to work with everything. I wish I could list all of the ways that I musically transition from one section to the next, but honestly, I don't remember. Sometimes it happened by accident. Sometimes the starts and ends of variations had to be completely reworked. Sometimes it was just about finding my way back to the root. Sometimes I had to abandon transition ideas altogether, segments altogether. That's just how it goes. So the biggest things I learned from this came from being put in a limiting situation and having to create my way out of it. Coming up with fleshed out songs in this format was super restrictive, which just meant that the whole process had to be more creative. If I was writing music in a traditional way, I would have never considered the things I did working with these limitations. But that's what keeps us creative. Limitations. Tell me to write a song with no limitations? Let's watch some Netflix and just think about it. Oh, you need me to write a 60-second song in 3/4 using general MIDI with no main melody that has one note that stays on the entire time? Let's go. Have you had to overcome any strange creative restrictions recently? Or maybe set limits on yourself in an attempt to boost creativity? Let me know. I'm curious. If you want to check out the Bubsy Pause on Fire soundtrack, you can find it on the internet. It's a collection of all the layers and levels and tunes stitched together in the way I think sounds best. And check out Bubsy Paws on Fire on PS4 and PC right now and coming soon to Nintendo Switch. Thanks for watching.